Rome woke to sirens. The sound crawled through narrow streets and over church domes, weaving itself into morning prayers. Inside the courthouse near Piazza Cavour, cameras already lined the steps. The city smelled of rain and tension. Lucia Moretti stepped from a black-armored van, wrists cuffed but head high. 2 officers escorted her into the building, their faces pale under the flash of bulbs. To the crowd, she was another headline, the lawyer who betrayed her country. To Vittorio and Elena, watching from a discreet balcony across the street, she was the last move left on a collapsing board. Isabelle Moreau's arrival had changed the shape of the game. The French prosecutor cut a figure of poise, her gray suit immaculate, her tone neutral but commanding. She'd come under the authority of an emergency international review, the sort of quiet intervention that frightened corrupt systems because it could not be bought. "Elena," Vittorio murmured, scanning the courthouse entrance. "Is Sophia in position?" A soft crackle answered from the earpiece. Sophia's voice was taut. "Affirmative. Back-channel feed active. We'll stream testimony live if DeLuca tries to bury it." Marco's voice followed. "Security's tighter than a coffin lid. I count 12 plainclothes agents, maybe more." Vittorio's jaw tightened. "He's expecting us." Inside the marble corridors, Lucia was seated before the review panel. Isabelle Moreau presided, flanked by Italian magistrates who pretended impartiality. The air felt heavy with stage civility. "Signora Moretti," Isabelle began in careful Italian, "you have requested to speak on record concerning a series of allegations involving Commissioner Lorenzo De Luca. Be aware that false testimony carries grave consequence." Lucia straightened. "I understand, Madam Prosecutor." "Then please," Isabelle said, "speak." Lucia took a breath that seemed to draw years of fear into her lungs. "I possess documentation showing Commissioner De Luca's creation of a clandestine unit known as the Black Cell. This unit conducted illegal operations, smuggled weapons under humanitarian pretexts, and eliminated witnesses under the guise of national security." One magistrate frowned. "These are serious accusations. Where is your proof?" Lucia nodded toward the screen beside the bench. "Presented through secure relay." Outside, in a van parked down the street, Sophia pressed a key. The projector inside the courtroom flickered to life. For a heartbeat, the image froze, then resolved into the digital archive. Raphael's manifests, Matteo's metadata, Antonio's courier logs. The same evidence the world had glimpsed during the gala now played before the law itself. Gasps filled the chamber. One of the magistrates rose, whispering furiously to a bailiff. Isabelle silenced them with a raised hand. "Continue," Lucia's voice steadied. "These are shipments authorized by De Luca's private counsel. Signatures by judges, ministers, and intermediaries who profited from the chaos they manufactured. My brother, Vittorio Moretti, became an unknowing financial front for their operations. When he refused further cooperation, they sought to destroy him, and me with him." A ripple of murmurs swept the room. Reporters outside caught fragments of sound through open windows. The story was alive again. At that moment, De Luca entered. No guards announced him. He walked in with the calm entitlement of a man who had never been told no. The room stiffened. "Madame Prosecutor," he said smoothly, "surely we're not allowing fugitives and known criminals to perform theater in a court of law." Isabelle regarded him with cool detachment. "You may sit, Commissioner. You'll have your turn." De Luca smiled, the kind of smile that hides teeth. "You think a performance of falsified data will undo decades of service? This is a farce, a spectacle orchestrated by a criminal syndicate desperate for relevance." Lucia met his gaze. "If I am desperate, Commissioner, it is for truth." He leaned closer. "Truth is written by those who survive." "Then start rewriting," another voice said, low, firm, and unmistakable. The room turned. Vittorio had stepped through the doorway, flanked by Marco and Elena. Cameras flashed. Officers shouted. Isabelle rose, visibly startled. "Signor Moretti, this session is closed." "Then open it," Vittorio interrupted, eyes locked on De Luca. "You want the villain?" "I'm right here." De Luca's expression didn't waver, but a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. "You shouldn't have come, Vittorio. You've already lost." "Not yet," Vittorio said quietly. You've frozen my accounts, burned my allies, and killed my friends. But you made one mistake. He reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate, and produced a small device. You forgot that ghosts leave echoes. He pressed the button. The speakers in the courtroom crackled, and then a voice filled the air. DeLuca's own voice, recorded weeks earlier during the warehouse breach, his orders clear. Take the drive. Kill the witnesses. Make it look like a smuggler's feud. The sound of his own words echoed off marble and stone. For the first time, DeLuca's confidence fractured. He lunged toward Vittorio, fury breaking through the mask, but officers restrained him as cameras surged forward. Reporters shouted. Microphones thrust toward the chaos. Isabel Moreau's voice cut through it like a blade. This session is no longer closed. Everything after that moved like a storm. The recording transmitted live through Sophia's feed, hitting every open network before DeLuca's men could block it. Within hours, international warrants followed. Ministers resigned. Judges vanished. The black cell unraveled in public view. Lucia was released before sunset. Isabel escorted her down the courthouse steps while police vehicles screamed through the streets. Rome had not seen such chaos in years. That night, the safe house was quiet. Sophia was gone, vanished with Gino and his daughter, leaving only a single text. The key is buried. Let the world find it. Marco tended his wounds in silence, exhausted. Lucia sat by the window, staring at the city lights, the weight of freedom almost heavier than chains. Vittorio poured 2 glasses of wine. He handed one to Elena, who stood barefoot near the open balcony. The wind tugged her hair loose. It's over, he said softly. She shook her head. No, it's only quieter. He smiled faintly. You always see through endings. Elena turned to face him. What will you do now that the Empire's gone? Vittorio looked past her to the city, the broken skyline, the faint sirens still singing somewhere far off. Maybe I'll build something honest, smaller, slower, something that doesn't need walls. She smiled. A bookshop by the sea? He laughed, the sound low and real. Maybe. They stood in silence for a long time. The world beyond their window was still burning, but for once the fire wasn't theirs. Finally, Elena said, You know they'll still come for you. I know, he replied. But at least now they'll have to say my name in daylight. She reached out and touched his hand. Then let's find our daylight too. He turned to her, the city's glow reflected in his eyes. We already have. Below them, Rome breathed, a city of ruins and rebirths. The truth was loose, and though the cost had been unbearable, it had lived. In another part of the city, Isabel filed her report, noting simply, evidence sufficient. Public interest served, inquiry ongoing. And somewhere on the dark web, under a simple header, Operation Leon, a single file kept spreading, unkillable and self-replicating, stamped with 4 words that had started it all. Someone's recording you. The morning after, the gala felt like waking inside a bruise. Rome's newspapers screamed headlines that said everything and nothing. News anchors argued over whether the uploads were proof or propaganda. Bank clerks in glass towers tapped keys with faces like funeral masks. DeLuca's men moved with elegant cruelty. Arrests, freezes, official denials. A chorus rehearsed to drown any new sound. Vittorio moved through it like a man whose face had been carved from ice. He had once believed money could buy time. Now it was time that had bought their enemies space. He'd slept in fits, half dreaming of Matteo's smile and Raphael's voice, and woke to a list of fresh betrayals. Marco was bruised but alive. Sophia, for the moment, safe in a hidden van with Gino and 2 ghost contacts who owed her favors. Lucia remained in custody, her legal team hamstrung by injunctions issued by courts that seemed to breathe DeLuca's air. They met in a narrow safe room beneath an aging bookshop, Sophia's choice. The sunlight that filtered through dust motes did little to dispel the heaviness that had settled over them. We lost access to 3 major banks overnight, Marco reported, tapping the tablet with a jerk. Shipments flagged. Our insurers pulled out. People on payroll are calling, asking if it's time to move their families. Vittorio listened, slow and deliberate. Every hit to his business was a hit to the fragile scaffolding he'd built to protect people who depended on him. It wasn't just profit, it was people's lives. Elena sat opposite him, hands clasped, jaw tight. The immediacy of battle had yielded to a grinding siege. She'd gone from operative to strategist, and the weight sat heavy in her shoulders. "We can't keep reacting," she said. "We need to force DeLuca to react to us on a scale he can't control." "How?" Vittorio asked. "We've got assets frozen, allies jailed, journalists dead or scared. His tendrils are everywhere." Sophia's voice was flat, exhausted but bright with a dangerous idea. "We use what he fears most, the institutions he co-opted. He built a private machine by corrupting public pillars. If we can make those pillars collapse in public view, not by evidence alone, but by witnesses with unassailable standing, the optics will be irreversible." "You mean court testimony?" Marco asked. "No," Sophia said. "I mean public witnesses. People DeLuca can't easily discredit. Foreign prosecutors, a UN investigator, a Vatican auditor who's known for integrity. Their involvement would make any domestic court think twice because the world will be watching them. And DeLuca hates being watched in a way he can't shut down with an order." Vittorio's mind clicked into the pattern of it. It was audacious and fragile. "Where do we get them?" he asked. Elena's hand shook slightly as she opened an encrypted channel. "Lucia has contacts. Before she was detained, she was submitting a note to an international human rights council in Geneva. She named one person in particular, Isabelle Moreau, a French prosecutor who once dismantled a trafficking ring that had ministers in its pockets. Isabelle owes Lucia a favor, a professional courtesy. If Lucia can get a direct line to Isabelle from custody, we can beg for the kind of discretionary intervention that terrifies men like DeLuca." Marco's laugh was a dry rasp. "We need a miracle, and a miracle needs paperwork. Lucia's in chains." Vittorio closed his eyes. He had been willing to trade paper for leverage, to give up his family's safety for advantage. Some prices had been too high to stomach, but he was learning that the currency of the new war was sacrifice, sometimes not monetary, but personal. "I'll go to Florence," he said suddenly. "There's a name Lucia gave us once, an old friend of hers who runs a private legal aid fund that has direct lines to Geneva. I'll see him. If anyone can arrange contact, it's him." Elena stared at him. "You? Leave the city? With all this bleeding? Someone needs to be mobile and untraced," he replied. "And I still have assets they can't freeze immediately if we move fast and hard." She reached across the table and touched his hand. An anchor. "And what if they arrest you too? What then?" He heard the fear in her voice, and for the first time in days, he didn't let the steel mask hide his answer. "Then you burn the rest," her eyes shone. For a moment they were two people who had found in each other a place to be vulnerable. That scared them both more than any bullet. He left within hours, taking a back route to Florence with Marco riding shotgun. Elena stayed in Rome, orchestrating diversions and moving Sophia between safe houses. Each step they took was a careful dance across a floor that could vanish beneath them at any moment. In Florence, the man Lucia had named, Professor Agostino Rinaldi, met Vittorio in the dim gallery of his law foundation. The professor was an old lion of legal solemnity. His contacts at Geneva were real and hard-earned. He didn't need to be convinced with money. He needed the moral gravity of a case that couldn't be ignored. "You have proof?" Rinaldi asked plainly. Vittorio laid the envelope on the table. Raphael's manifests, Matteo's metadata, a chain of courier names that sent a chill through the professor's face. "This is the spine of a network," Rinaldi murmured. "It's enough to get an investigator interested if presented correctly. The Geneva Council moves slowly upon, but we don't need speed. We need integrity. If Isabelle Moreau takes a call from Lucia, and if she sees your paper trail, she will request emergency review. Publicity will follow. DeLuca's reach is wide, but international pressure is a different animal." Vittorio nodded. "Then do it. Call her." Rinaldi's fingers were steady as he dialed. The voice on the other end was a clipped French cadence that carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "Madame Moreau," he said, "we have a request for discretionary review." Back in Rome, Elena juggled a dozen crises. Sophia had agreed to stay long enough to seed more mirrors, then plan an extraction. Gino had vanished to get his daughter out of the country. Marco ferried payments in cash through obscure Swiss clients. The network pulsed like a living thing, strained, but still breathing. Then came the call they'd been waiting for. Isabelle Moreau's office would not only review the file, she would travel to Rome personally if Lucia could provide live testimony. It was the slimmest of openings, but it was an opening. Elena felt something like relief, and with it, the vertigo of hope. But De Luca was not idle. He tightened the screws. More freezes, more arrests, an expertly leaked evidence clip that painted Matteo as a conspirator who staged his own death. The machine moved like a hydra, and each head they lopped off birthed two more. That night, Vittorio returned to Rome. He found Elena in the same dim room beneath the bookshop, face pale but resolute. She leaned into him without a word, and he held her like he'd been doing it for a lifetime. Outside, sirens sang their distant chant. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Isabelle arrives. If Lucia speaks, and if Isabelle believes, the world will look. And when it looks, De Luca's orders will be harder to enforce." Vittorio kissed her forehead. "Then we give Lucia a voice." Elena's fingers tightened. "And if that fails?" He met her eyes, unblinking. "Then we keep fighting, until there's nothing left to lose." They sat in the dim light, two fugitives knitting a fragile alliance with law and courage. The stakes were higher than any of them had imagined. The war had become not just about vengeance, but about making a safe space for the truth to surface. The plan ahead was dangerous, and the cost unknown. But for the first time in a week, hope had a shape. Outside, in the city that had seen empires rise and fall, the world turned and listened, waiting to see if the next day would bring a verdict or an execution. They had one day to make it count. The gala glittered like an altar to power. Chandeliers spilled light over glass and silk. Waiters moved like silent instruments. Cameras hovered politely at the edges. Senators, bishops, celebrities, all the kinds of names that made law feel optional, sat beneath the vaulted ceiling, applauding a charity speech while the world watched on satellite feeds. It was the perfect stage for someone who preferred sin to shadow. Vittorio stood in the crowd like a predator in a tuxedo, his face a practiced calm. Elena was at his side, hair pinned, eyes sharp under the pale light. Sophia had slipped into the broadcast control room disguised as a network tech. Gino had worked his route as the courier, and Marco moved the perimeter like a ghost, eyes on exits, fingers wrapped around a trigger. The envelope, Raphael's manifests, Matteo's metadata, Antonio's courier lists, was stowed inside Elena's clutch. The paper sent a memory of gunsmoke and hospital wards. At precisely 21 minutes past 10, De Luca rose from the dais to accept an award for service to the nation. Cameras pivoted, microphones inhaled, and the world tuned in. That was the moment they had chosen. Sophia's headset whispered into her ear. "Hand off in 60 seconds. Her palms were steady. Years of tapping satellite protocols had taught her that panic was a programmer's enemy. She slid into the uplink booth, fingers moving across keys like a pianist coaxing a requiem. Gino eased a padded case across the room to Teleroma's field tech, who accepted it with the bored indifference of routine. Marco's call came through, soft and controlled. Now. Vittorio felt the air shift, 1,000 cameras and sensors switching to a single heartbeat. Elena's mouth formed the names of those they could lose if the room changed in the wrong way. She gave him a look that asked a question he didn't need to answer. Sophia broke the handshake protocol. For a fraction of a second, the feed hiccuped, a tiny wrinkle in a fabric millions expected to be seamless. Then she threaded their payload into the stream, manifests, signatures, courier logs, encrypted voice memos from Raphael describing transfers, and the chain of custody metadata from Matteo proving editorial control. Sophia pushed the button that mirrored the payload across Astralink's redundant nodes. The signal leapt up through satellites and across continents. On living room screens and tablet displays, in pubs and embassies, the gala's broadcast stuttered, and then, in the space of a single heartbeat, it was replaced by files that made corruption look like art. The auditorium held its breath. The projector screens that had been photographs of De Luca's smile now scrolled names and timestamps, bank transfers, sealed courier manifests. A voice played, Raphael's, calm and definitive. This shipment cleared on 0914 under seal code 7F, delivered to courier Antonio Moretti at 0212. The feed displayed a list of ministers and judges and priests with annotated transfers. The cameras panned wildly as hosts realized the feed had become evidence. For 60 chaotic seconds, the world saw a tapestry that couldn't be denied. Shipping manifests that matched Raphael's handwriting, video timestamp overlays that referenced Matteo's metadata, the signature of a Vatican courier, the seal of a Swiss trust. The payload duplicated itself across servers. In Geneva and London, Sophia had anticipated blackouts and built mirrors so the files would pop up everywhere at once. Then the broadcast slammed. Back to DeLuca, smiling as if nothing had happened. The switch was clean. Producers in the control room mouthed apologies. Technicians swallowed curses, and the gala continued. But screens across the globe were no longer the same. People were already uploading, reposting, questioning. The internet is a rumor mill that loves a scandal, and now the rumor had proof. Chaos unfurled in measured waves. In the auditorium, a cluster of diplomats stood, faces blanching. Phones buzzed everywhere. Press feeds erupted. Matteo's verification keys, partial but sufficient once paired with Raphael's voice, leaked via social mirrors and encrypted drop sites. Lucia's name trended before DeLuca could issue a statement. In embassies, men who'd once been untouchable leaned toward monitors with shaking hands. For 20 glorious minutes, they rode the high, a cascade of simultaneous uploads, mirrored servers, and an army of gray-hat activists who believed in unmaking monsters. It felt like the world had turned on a hinge. Then DeLuca responded. He didn't scream. He orchestrated. In the control room, a secondary team, DeLuca's men in suits with legal briefcases, activated emergency protocols. Teleroma's feeds were cut with official-looking court orders. Satellite providers received sealed requests citing national security. Journalists who had promised publication discovered their editorial lines blacked out. Banks received a single classified memo and froze Moretti Group accounts under an ongoing investigation. Antonio, watching from Rome with a glass in hand, let out a satisfied breath, but the files had already seeded. The cat was not entirely bagged. Patches of evidence were proliferating in fringe servers beyond DeLuca's immediate reach. Newsrooms in London and Geneva, independent outlets with legal buffers, began to republish. Citizens with mirrors and decoders reassembled the payload piece by painstaking piece. Vittorio watched the counterstrike like a surgeon watching infections spread. He felt the cold calculus arriving, assets freezing, legal injunctions, the quiet complicity of men who'd previously taken coffee with DeLuca. Banks locking accounts hit his supply chain hard. Embargoes on shipping cut off crews in Trieste and Naples overnight. His phone lit with panicked messages from managers. Ports held, shipments impounded, investments suspended. The Moretti ledger bled. Elena's hands moved again, contacting Sophia, coordinating backup mirrors, issuing keys. Marco was on the phone with trusted lieutenants, ordering ships to turn, instructing pockets of the network to use cache routes he'd thought extinct. Vittorio's face didn't change outwardly, but his mind recalculated with brutal speed. The attack had been successful, but in war, success is merely the opening of more doors to fight through. Across the city, DeLuca held a press conference. He looked tired and noble and angry, and he spoke with the practiced cadence of someone who made law pliant with a single sentence. He denounced the fabricated uploads, invoked national security, and promised immediate arrests. Within hours, the Prefetto issued warrants for Sophia's arrest, the operator who'd touched the uplink. Teleroma's servers were seized. The Vatican issued a terse denial that rippled into frantic denials from a dozen embassies. Worse, a video clip, expertly edited and probably fabricated, began to circulate showing Vittorio in an argument with Matteo hours before the journalist's death. The clip looked authentic enough to wound. DeLuca's machine was already manufacturing counter-narratives, while the real evidence spread in 1,000 stubborn fragments. Elena watched the feeds with a cold, hard edge. They can freeze our money, and they can bully networks, but they can't kill the file once it's in the wild. Her voice was thin with anger and exhaustion. People have copies now. Vittorio folded his hands, the weight of responsibility like lead at his chest. We'll weather the freeze. We'll reroute. We'll survive. He hated the way the words sounded like promises he might not keep. Get Lucia legal representation, now. Sofia needs safe passage out of the country. Marco, salvage what cash routes you can. Sofia, if you can't get out, bury the keys in a place only you know. On the far side of the city, De Luca smiled privately. He'd neutralized most of the immediate damage, financial clamps, arrests, and a narrative that cut at the ankles of their credibility. But he knew the seed had been planted. He ordered the next phase: discredit the remaining witnesses, tighten international pressure, and ensure that anyone who had sympathized would now be afraid. Back in the safe apartment, the group drew breath and set to work. They had won a battle, a blinding public vital assault on a man who'd assumed invulnerability. They had paid for it with more than blood. Matteo was dead. Raphael was missing. Lucia was jailed. Their finances strangled. The cost was real. Vittorio looked at Elena, at Marco, at Sofia's single text. I'm in. I'll hold keys. He found a small spark of something like hope in her curt message. They had started a fire. Now they had to make sure it burned in the right places and not consume the very people it was supposed to save. Outside, sirens wailed in distant directions. The night had changed forever. A new war had begun. The taste of defeat was metallic and bitter. For 48 hours, they had tried to crawl back from the edge, copying what they could, smuggling people between safe houses, slipping encrypted notes through channels they hoped were still clean. Each time they thought they'd found a gap in De Luca's net, it closed. Matteo's death had been a blow that echoed down corridors they didn't even know existed. Lucia's arrest felt like a guillotine falling on their necks. They gathered in a cramped flat outside San Lorenzo, where the only light came from a single desk lamp and the glow of Elena's tablet. Marco moved like a man who had learned to be useful and then punished for it. His sling still ached, but his voice was steady enough. The envelope from Raphael, the one they had wrested from that first ambush, sat between them like an altar. We still have names, Marco said. Not everything's gone. Vittorio tapped the paper with a fingertip, as if feeling for a pulse. Names, timestamps, courier seals, enough to make somebody look twice. He looked at Elena. What kind of visibility do we have left on De Luca's network? She blew out a breath that fogged in the cold room. He owns the prosecutorial chain and most of the broadcast nodes. He can freeze bank accounts and issue injunctions without much ceremony. He's embedded people in 3 major media houses. They'll kill any story before it airs. Silence settled. It was the kind that had edges. Then we don't play by their rules, Marco said finally. We take the air away from them. Vittorio's eyes narrowed. Explain. Marco leaned forward. There's one old satellite uplink company. Little known, rarely used now because everyone trusts digital pipelines. They subcontract broadcast feeds during large events, charity galas, political speeches. The company is called Astralink. It became a legal gray zone when international rights started shifting. Antonio's men have been using them to route sensitive files. If we can seize an uplink and push our evidence into a live feed during a national event, De Luca can't censor the world fast enough. It'll be chaos, and we need chaos. Elena's face changed as the idea sank in. A live dump. Simultaneous publications. We flood every outlet with the same payload so they can't claim fabrication. But we need more than files. We need someone who can hijack the uplink and a physical presence at the broadcast center to plug the drive. Do we have either? Vittorio asked. Maybe. Marco hesitated. There's a woman, Sofia Gentile. Used to be one of Matteo's best sources. She's a gray hat operator. She used to crack the satellite feeds for fun until the state bought her. She's been off-grid for a year. Matteo was in touch before he died. He promised he'd protect her if she helped. He'd tried to bring her into the chain. Where? Elena demanded. Marco shrugged. I can get a ping to her new drop. But she's expensive and dangerous. Vittorio thought of the ledger, of frozen assets and men dying in silent rooms. Then find her. They found Sofia in a shuttered internet cafe 3 streets from the train line, wearing an oversized coat and a scarf that hid the lower half of her face. She was smaller than they expected, with hands made for keyboards, and eyes that looked like they'd cataloged every way a person could leave a life behind. "You're brave," she said without preamble when Marco slipped the encrypted thumb drive across the table. "Or stupid. Maybe both." Vittorio didn't rise to the insult. "We have proof." "And a plan," Sophia smiled, not warm. "Proof without distribution is a coffin you build for someone else." He explained. The envelope, Raphael's manifests, Antonio's courier logs, Matteo's partial metadata. He told her about the gala, the way DeLuca liked to be seen among saints and senators, how the commissioner loved a stage and the glow of polite applause. He told her about Astralink and the window where a satellite uplink would accept a codec switch for the gala's live feed. Sophia listened, folding her fingers under the lamp. When he finished, she tapped a cigarette into the ashtray and considered them like a problem set. "You want to hijack a live national broadcast," she said slowly, "and you want me to patch your payload through a satellite that my old colleagues monitor every hour?" Vittorio didn't blink. "Yes," Sophia's laugh had no humor. "Do you understand what that means? If we pull this off, millions will see it. If we fail, you'll die in a way that will make headlines for a day and then disappear. If we succeed, you will be hunted forever in a way that makes prison look merciful." Elena's hand found the envelope and squeezed it. "We know the cost. We do it anyway." Sophia's expression softened for the first time. Matteo had a code phrase he liked when the work got too heavy. "No more children unhung for the sins of rulers." He believed leaking the right thing at the right time could topple a man. "He trusted you." Vittorio's throat tightened. "Then help us." She exhaled and tapped a contact into her cracked phone. "I'll need access to Astralink's maintenance node, a hard line to upload the payload, and one person on the inside at Teleroma, their broadcast partner. I know someone, Gino. He works for Antonio as a courier. He hates what he's done. If you can get him, I can make the feed a mirror instead of a pipe." "Gino?" Marco barked a laugh of disbelief. "You want me to trust a courier? You trust the envelope between our fingers?" Sophia snapped. "Trust is a luxury. Desperation is a currency," she smiled. "Bring me Gino. Bring me the Astrokey and I'll find the rest." The plan fell into a rhythm like a wartime drill. Gino proved easier to peel than anyone had dared hope. A man with a gambling debt and a daughter in Florence who had a fever and needed medicine. Marco found him drunk and angry in a bar off Via Veneto and made him an offer. "Help us. Get your daughter out of the country and walk." Gino's eyes flicked to the envelope, to the people who had fired weapons and worn blood as a workday garment. He swallowed his fear and nodded. "On one condition," he said, voice small. "You make sure my daughter never knows what I did." They promised. Sophia moved like a ghost. With Gino's access, she sketched a route. Antonio's man would hand a hard drive to Teleroma's field technician during the gala, a routine transfer he'd performed 100 times. That night, Teleroma's uplink would switch to Astralink for the Vatican Charities International segment. Sophia would intercept the upstream handshake and replace the stream with their payload, the manifests, the courier logs, the voice memos from Raphael, metadata from Matteo proving chain of custody. But timing is everything, she warned. "We need the public moment, when DeLuca takes the stage. That's the moment everyone's eyes are on the feed. That's when the lie becomes visible." It was audacious. It was violent. It was possibly illegal in a dozen countries. It was the only shot they had left. Vittorio looked at Elena. "You know what will happen if they catch you." She met his gaze, steady, resolute. "I know." He felt something break open in his chest, a hollow easing into a new kind of readiness. "Then we do it." Sophia tapped the cigarette out, standing. "We meet at midnight at the Teleroma handoff. Gino will do his part. Marco will divert the surveillance. Lucia, we need her to create a legal ripple. Even from custody, a petition filed at the right moment can buy us seconds. Marco will get word to one of her junior clerks. It's messy, but that's how you make a perfect mess." Outside the cafe, the city moved on. Taxis, late shift workers, the indifferent litter of the night. Inside, a ragtag coalition stitched together a plan that could either free a country from corruption or carve their names into a ledger of traitors. Sophia looked at each of them in turn. "If we do this, we cross a line. There's no comeback where we can still be people we like in the mirror." Elena's voice was a steady blade. We don't pretend to be innocent. We pretend to be necessary. Vittorio nodded, more to himself than anyone else. Then tonight we make them answer to the light. No more hidden tribunals. They left the cafe with the kind of silence that precedes an all or nothing. The envelope lay safe under Elena's jacket. Gino walked with them like a shadow who had recently discovered his own reflection. As Sophia disappeared into the back alleys with her hood up, she glanced back once and said, almost to herself, "If we fail, remember Matteo. If we win, remember everyone." They tried to bury, they drove toward Rome's heart where a gala glittered like a beacon, unaware that 3 desperate people were already stitching a transmission that might burn the city down or save it entirely. They had spent the afternoon moving pieces into place, thinking like chess masters who lived by inches. Vittorio trusted process. Elena trusted patterns. Together they'd built a fragile web. Backups in Geneva, legal shields courtesy of Lucia. Matteo's readiness to publish the dossier the second they gave the word. At 9:12 p.m., the first thread snapped. The encrypted line hummed with static, and then a single terse message from Matteo. "I'm compromised. They're at my door. Run if you get this. Publish now." The file attachment failed to download before the feed died. "Impossible," Elena breathed, hands already flying across the laptop. Matteo had a burner route. He wouldn't expose himself. Vittorio's jaw tightened. Then someone knows our burn patterns. He slammed his fist into the couch once and pushed up, eyes cold as flint. "Move, now!" They split like practiced thieves. Vittorio called Marco, who answered with the clipped urgency of a man used to bad nights. "I'm on it. Lucia. She's with a notary preparing the diplomatic deposit." "Get her out," he barked. "On my way." They were only 5 minutes from the safe apartment when the world tilted. Marco's voice returned, blood pooling in his words. "They're outside the law firm. SWAT. Orders from the Prefetto. Lucia says they arrested her. She's cuffed. She says it's a frame. She says..." The line cut. Vittorio slammed the steering wheel so hard the tires squealed. "Who issued the order?" "De Luca," Marco replied, breath ragged. "He just flashed clearance. There's a court order on her. Static swallowed the message. Arriving at the law firm, the scene was calculated cruelty. Black SUVs, emergent lights, men in suits with badges, and the press blocking the sidewalk like vultures. Lucia sat on the marble steps, her hands behind her back, composed but hollow-eyed, as officers recited charges and photographers screamed for a statement. Elena moved toward her, but a gloved policeman stepped between them. "You can't see her," he said flatly, the kind of phrase that heralds a public execution masked as procedure. Vittorio didn't argue. He watched Lucia's eyes find his across the crowd. A brief, sharp exchange of anguish and instruction. "Keep fighting." She mouthed, "Trust no one." They retreated into the night with nothing but the envelope, and then a new message. Marco. Matteo's apartment exploded. Dead. Files gone. They took Raphael en route to the hospital. He's gone. Protocol V is active. Everything that felt like hope unspooled into smoke. Raphael, the one man who had risked his life to give them the manifests, had been spirited away. Matteo, who could have ignited a scandal with a single published dossier, was dead in a smoking ruin. Lucia, the legal anchor, was cuffed and paraded as a criminal. The net tightened. Elena's fingers trembled on the wheel. She'd built escape routes immune to conventional surveillance, contingencies for arrests, fail-safes to prevent murder. De Luca had anticipated them all. He didn't merely react. He preempted. "It's not just power," she said quietly, voice scraped raw. "He has a machine. He's already purged every exposure route." Vittorio's lips moved. The words were small and contained a dangerous calm. "Then we burn the machine that built him." He thought of the servers in Geneva and London that held mirrored copies. "We trigger a cascade. If we can make it impossible to control the narrative, if every channel is flooded with the same evidence simultaneously, De Luca can't arrest truth." Elena's eyes flashed with a brittle light. "We can try," she swallowed. "But we're missing Matteo's verification keys. Without his proofs, the timestamps and editorial verification, the first round will look like fabrication." They drove to Marco's last known location, an abandoned garage 3 blocks from the canal. Marco was there, slumped against a stack of crates, face ashen, jacket ripped, eyes haunted. "They got inside my comms," he rasped. "They tapped the burns. They had badges, legal clearances. They had," he cut off, mouth working. "They had a woman inside Lucia's office 2 days ago. She was on the notary team. She had access. They recorded every meeting. They built the paperwork that would make her look like a conspirator." Vittorio's hands curled into fists. He had always assumed the greatest betrayals would come from men like Antonio, brash, ambitious, stupid enough to think they could switch sides. The real betrayal was quiet, paper-thin, performed in the dead hours by people who smelled like perfume and legal starch. "How do we get Matteo's keys?" Elena asked, voice brittle. "We go to where the pieces touch," Vittorio said. "We go to Antonio. They move like shadows." Antonio had been careful, then cocky, then careless. He wanted them thinking Rome was safe. He wanted them thinking family mattered. He had underestimated how lethal grief could be. The apartment they found was a monument to arrogance. Polished surfaces, an office lined with portraits of smiling benefactors, a mahogany safe. But arrogance leaves marks, and Vittorio read them like print. Antonio had left a trail of callous contempt. Security with blind spots predictable enough to exploit, henchmen loyal only to money. They struck at midnight while Antonio entertained a thin crowd of cronies in a private salon. Vittorio's men, the few who remained loyal and who'd not been compromised, slipped in with Elena and Marco, moving with ice-cold efficiency. Elena's hands were steady as she disabled cameras, as precise as a surgeon's. They found Antonio in his study, a half-empty glass at his elbow, watching footage on 3 monitors. Vittorio's face, Matteo's ruin, Lucia's arrest, a triumphant symphony. He didn't bother to hide. He smiled with the contempt of a man who believed himself untouchable. "You came for the family heirlooms?" he said, mock courtesy. Vittorio stepped in, and for a terrifying moment the room felt unbearably small. "You killed hope, Antonio." Antonio's smile didn't falter. "I guided fate." Elena moved like a shadow, then held up a flash drive. "Where does DeLuca keep the records for Protocol V? Send them, and maybe we stop this whole parade." Antonio laughed, a sound like slick oil. "You'll need more than a drive. You'll need the man who signs them." He reached for a drawer and pulled out a stack of sealed envelopes. "But I'll make a trade. Your sister's freedom for the drive." Vittorio's breath left him. "You trading family?" Elena said softly, the accusation thin as wire. "You didn't always choose family," Antonio replied. "I did. It was a bargain shaped by poison." Vittorio understood the calculus. Trade something dear for leverage, control the narrative by appearing to cooperate. If he handed over one life to save the rest, he would lose the one thing that still tethered him. He thought of Lucia's hands, the curve of her jaw the first time she'd smiled at him as a child, the way she'd never asked for his wars. He thought of Dante's proverb. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. Vittorio made the decision like a man cutting a vein. He slid the envelope with trembling fingers across the desk. Antonio's eyes glittered. He picked it up slowly as Vittorio's men moved to bind him. "Keep your family," Antonio said, voice soft and venomous. "You'll need them broken to remember who you are." They left with an empty safe and a new set of burns across their backs. Behind them, DeLuca's voice echoed across 1,000 channels they hadn't even known were compromised. Thumbnails of Matteo's death, Lucy's confession stitched into a clip, Raphael's disappearance displayed as proof of conspiracy. Protocol V wasn't just a purge. It was a rewrite. In the Maserati, Elena pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and wept, not for Matteo, not for Raphael, but because the world they'd been trying to redeem had turned them into the very thing they'd tried to destroy. Desperate, compromised, and dangerously alone, Vittorio didn't sleep. He drove through the gray hours, clutching the hollow ache of a man who'd traded blood for leverage and found the price far too steep. The city outside slid by, indifferent. At first light, he stopped by the river and watched debris float past like small confessions. He would rebuild. He would strike back. But the victory they'd planned for had soured into a war of attrition they could not yet win. As dawn bled into Rome, a single encrypted message blinked across Elena's dead laptop. DeLuca has activated international hold orders on Moretti assets. Freezing accounts, embargo on shipping. We're being strangled economically. Vittorio looked at the message and felt the ledger of his life closing like a door. They had won nothing, only condensed their enemy's fury into a more precise weapon. He stared at the river, voice low and steady as a death knell. We lost tonight more than men. We lost the truth. Elena's hand found his. Then we make another truth. He squeezed back once, a promise and a warning. Then we die trying. The next morning began with the sound of church bells echoing faintly across Rome. Vittorio stood at the apartment window, watching pigeons scatter over rooftops and people move like chess pieces below. It was a city built on secrets, old ones buried under marble, new ones traded over espresso. He knew both kinds had teeth. Behind him, Elena sat at the dining table, laptop open, cables and drives spread like an operating table. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, expression tense. They've accelerated everything, she said. The servers are pinging from 3 different IPs. DeLuca's digital cleanup crew is already erasing documents connected to the Black Cell project. Vittorio turned from the window, adjusting his cufflinks as if preparing for a funeral. Then we move before they finish. She shook her head. We can't dump raw data. It's not enough. Too easy for them to claim it's fabricated. We need something bigger. Something they can't deny. Like what? Elena's eyes met his. Testimony, he frowned. No one will speak against DeLuca. They'd rather die. Not if they're already dead to him, she said, tapping a name on her screen. Matteo found a contact in Naples. Rafael Caruso, former intelligence logistics officer. He coordinated DeLuca's weapon shipments until last year, when one went missing, and he took the blame. He's been hiding ever since. Vittorio leaned over her shoulder. Can we find him? He reached out this morning. Said he'll talk, but only to you. In person, he straightened. Then we go to Naples. Elena hesitated. It could be another trap. Of course it's a trap, he said dryly. But that doesn't mean it's not useful. By dusk, they were southbound, the hum of the engine filling the quiet. The road curved along the coastline, the Tyrrhenian Sea flashing silver under the fading sun. For a while, neither spoke. Elena broke the silence. You don't have to come yourself. I can handle the meeting. Vittorio gave a small, humorless laugh. You really think I'd let you walk into something like that alone? I've walked into worse, she said. He glanced at her, one brow raised. You sound almost proud. Just experienced, she replied, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. They reached the outskirts of Naples just after midnight. The air was thick with salt and diesel. Rafael Caruso's safe house was buried inside the crumbling shell of an old cannery, a forgotten industrial ruin where stray cats slept on rusted machinery. Marco was already there, pale but alive, standing guard outside. His arm was in a sling, his face stitched from the warehouse ambush. Boss, he greeted. No tails, but he's jumpy. Good, Vittorio said. He should be. Inside, Rafael Caruso looked older than his 40 years. Gray stubble, sunken eyes, the smell of cheap whiskey hanging over him. He flinched when Vittorio entered. You're Moretti, he said hoarsely. Didn't think I'd live to see you in person. That makes 2 of us, Vittorio replied. You said you had information. Rafael nodded shakily. DeLuca's using diplomatic routes to move weapons. He's not just arming militias, he's funding coups, trading intelligence for power. He has judges, ministers, even Vatican contacts. The Black Cell isn't just a shadow unit. It's the spine of his control. Elena's tone was cautious. We need proof. Documents, signatures, transfers. Rafael reached for an envelope on the table. Here, copies of manifests, courier names, timestamps. It's enough to burn him if you move fast. Vittorio flipped through the papers, scanning the seals and coded numbers. It was all there. Too clean, maybe, but explosive. Then Rafael's eyes darted toward the doorway. You shouldn't have come here. Vittorio froze. Why? Rafael swallowed. Because they followed me. Before the words finished leaving his mouth, glass shattered. A spray of gunfire ripped through the room, splintering the table. Vittorio grabbed Elena, dragging her to the floor as bullets tore through the walls. Marco returned fire from outside, shouting into his earpiece, "East wall." 3 shooters! Raphael crawled toward the envelope, clutching it like salvation. "Don't let them take it." A bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him back. Elena fired through the doorway, dropping one of the attackers. Vittorio moved fast, low, deadly. 2 shots, 2 kills. Smoke and dust filled the air, the acrid scent of cordite choking the room. Then silence. Raphael groaned, clutching his wound. "They'll keep coming? You have to run." Elena ripped a strip of fabric from her shirt and pressed it to his shoulder. "We're not leaving you?" He shook his head weakly. "You don't understand. DeLuca doesn't want to kill you. Not yet. He wants you alive. He needs leverage." Vittorio's jaw clenched. "Leverage for what?" "To keep the rest quiet," Raphael gasped. "He's blackmailing the Prime Minister. The files, they're proof. If you release them, the government falls." Elena froze. "He's embedded that deep?" "Yes," Raphael said, eyes rolling back. "DeLuca doesn't fear exposure. He owns it." He slumped forward, unconscious. Vittorio grabbed the envelope and turned to Marco. "Get him to a doctor. Disappear him. We'll contact when it's safe." Marco nodded grimly, hauling the wounded man away. Outside, Elena leaned against the van, shaking. "We can't win this with evidence. He controls the system that's supposed to punish him." Vittorio lit a cigarette, his hand steady despite the chaos. "Then we burn the system too." She stared at him. "You're talking about destroying the entire power structure of Italy." "I'm talking about survival," he said coldly. "If the throne is corrupt, you don't beg for mercy. You set it on fire." Elena's voice softened. "And when the fire burns you too?" He looked at her, eyes dark and quiet. "Then at least it ends on my terms." They drove through the night again, this time heading north. The envelope sat between them like a ticking bomb. Inside were names that could unmake governments, people who believed they were untouchable. At dawn, they stopped near a cliff overlooking the sea. The world looked deceptively peaceful, sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Elena leaned on the railing, her hair tangled by the wind. "You know what happens if we go through with this, right? There's no going back, no hiding, no empire left to return to." Vittorio stepped beside her, watching the waves crash below. Empires fall every day, but sometimes they leave behind something better. She turned to him. "And what would that be?" He looked at her, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Us." For a moment she didn't breathe. Then she said quietly, "Then we make sure we survive it." Far away, in a sleek office overlooking the Palazzo Chigi, Lorenzo De Luca poured himself espresso as an aide handed him a tablet. On it, a live feed showed grainy images of Vittorio and Elena standing by the sea. De Luca smiled. "They think they're ahead. Good. Let them gather everything." He sipped his coffee, eyes gleaming. "When they return to Rome, they'll bring me exactly what I need." He set the cup down gently. "Activate Protocol V and send Antonio my regards." Rome greeted them like a conspirator, low clouds, slick cobblestones, and the kind of quiet that meant the city was watching. Vittorio navigated the rental through narrow lanes until they reached a safe apartment tucked behind an unmarked door near the Tiber. The building smelled faintly of incense and old books, a perfect place to plan the next betrayal. Inside, Vittorio dropped his bag on a sofa and finally let himself breathe. For a man used to motion, pauses were rare and precious. Elena moved to the small kitchen, boiling water for coffee as if she'd lived in safe houses her whole life. Maybe she had. "You look tired," she said without looking up. "Not as tired as I expected," he replied, voice soft in a way that surprised them both. "Adrenaline keeps you young." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Adrenaline keeps you alive." He watched her hands, steady, practiced. "We need allies," he said. "People who aren't already in De Luca's pocket." She set 2 cups down, sliding one across to him. "Do you have someone in mind?" Vittorio picked up the mug, staring at the steam. "Lucia Moretti," he said. The name landed between them like a lit fuse. My sister. She runs a small law firm in Rome. Independent. She's always been able to look at the world without fear. Elena's eyes narrowed. Your sister? You haven't brought family into this before. He gave a faint, rueful smile. I protected them by keeping them out of the business. But now I need someone who can take these documents and make them public without being silenced. Lucia is careful. She archives copies in 3 different embassies and knows which journalists won't sell. Elena cocked her head. You trust family. Not automatically, he corrected. I test them. Lucia has passed. She inhaled slowly, measuring him. Okay. While you contact her, I'll prepare the route. But we have to accept that once we start, there's no going back. De Luca will respond publicly, with accusations, with bodies, with laws rewritten to suit him. Vittorio brushed a hand across his face. I know. They worked through maps and calls in tense silence. Elena had a way of speaking that flattened time. She could point out surveillance nodes, probable listening posts, and the exact building where De Luca's most trusted men met. Vittorio added muscle and money to her detailed map. A coalition of hackers, a black market courier, a disgraced journalist hungry for a real scoop. At dusk, Vittorio slipped out to meet Lucia in an old cafe near Piazza Navona. Lucia arrived in a gray coat, hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Seeing her, something protective softened inside him. Vittorio, she said, sitting. You look wrecked. He gave a quick nod. People who should be dead aren't, and people who should be loyal aren't. She listened as he explained, and when he finished, she folded her hands as if considering a court case. If this is true, she said, you'll need verifiable evidence, not just claims. De Luca will bury you with the weight of his office. We have the drive, he said. We have shipment logs. We have proof of Antonio's couriers. And we have witnesses who've been bought and scared into silence. Lucia's face hardened. Then we'll move fast. I can secure an editor at La Voce who owes me a favor. We'll need redundancy, backups to secure servers in Geneva and London, and legal counsel ready to file injunctions as soon as the story drops. When Vittorio returned to the apartment, Elena was waiting with a small folder. I talked to an old contact, Matteo. He's a journalist who hates De Luca for his own reasons. He's in. Vittorio sank down beside her. Good. They shared a silence that was less empty than it appeared. 2 people had their lives on the line, and yet had found a delicate rhythm. The danger didn't lessen their closeness. It sharpened it. When you face death, the small gestures, a hand on a knee, a warm cup of coffee, become sacred. You ever think about what life would look like if you weren't? Elena started, voice thin. If I wasn't what? He prompted. If you weren't the man who built an empire on the edge of law and shadow. If you were free of it. He considered the question, not sure how many properties and silenced enemies made up the man he'd become. Sometimes, he admitted. But I don't regret everything. The people I provided for. The jobs, the small mercies. It's complicated. You always make things complicated, she said. But it sounded fond. He looked at her then. Really looked. The way the light fell along her jaw. How the edges of her hands trembled slightly when she was tired. And you? He asked. If you could take a life not defined by running, what would you build? Her eyes went far away. A small place by the sea. A bookshop that sells the right kind of books. Somewhere quiet enough to hear your own thoughts again. He smiled, surprising himself with how much the image pleased him. I'll fund it, she arched an eyebrow. You'll fund a bookshop? I'll fund whatever gives you peace. His voice was quiet and utterly sincere. A silence deeper than any storm settled between them. And then, like 2 magnets finally allowed to touch, their hands found each other. No words, only warmth. The kiss that followed was not the hot, youthful thing from impulsive lovers. It was a slow claiming, a mutual acknowledgement of a strange intimacy born of shared danger. For a second, the world narrowed to the point where all the sound was the pulse in their wrists and the distant murmur of Rome. When they pulled apart, breathless, Elena laughed softly. This is reckless. So are we, he replied. They slept in the same room that night, less like a couple and more like allies who had staked everything on each other's competence. When dawn crept through, Vittorio woke before Elena did and watched her sleep. He realized he had already begun recalibrating his priorities, not as a boss, but as a man made aware of a quiet, fragile future. The day moved fast. Documents were copied, servers prepared, safe lines opened across embassies. Matteo agreed to publish as soon as he verified the paper trail. Lucia prepared legal shields. Elena coordinated technical redundancies. Even with a plan, nerves frayed at the edges. At midday, an encrypted ping lit Elena's screen. An automated scan had flagged unusual traffic to one of their safe routes. A tracer. Someone was testing their links. DeLuca knows something, Elena said, voice controlled but thin. Vittorio straightened. Then he's nervous. Good. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world felt small. Two people in a great machine, pulling at the threads. They were no longer alone. Late that night, as Rome settled into a hush, Vittorio and Elena walked the Tiber embankment together. The city lights glittered like a map of small, blinking futures. Elena, he said, stopping beneath a street lamp, if this works and DeLuca falls, what then? Will you reclaim your life? She looked at him, and something honest and fierce shone there. If this works, I want to stand in court and show every face that tried to erase me. I want a name again, and maybe, her mouth quirked into a half-smile, a bookshop by the sea. He nodded. Then we'll get you your name back. She took his hand. And you, Vittorio? What do you want when it's over? He answered without hesitation. A cleaner conscience. A smaller war. She squeezed his hand and they continued walking into the night, both clutching illusions that felt dangerously like hope. They didn't know the messenger who watched them from a shadowed car 2 streets away, thumb hovering over a phone. They didn't know he would choose this moment to send a single word back to its origin. Found. The night sky over Milan was a bruised shade of gray, heavy with fog and tension. The streets around Porta Garibaldi were almost deserted, the kind of emptiness that feels deliberate, like the city was holding its breath. Vittorio parked the car 2 blocks from the train yard, killing the lights. Stay here, he said, checking his gun. Elena's glare could have cut glass. We've already had that argument. He gave her a look that said he wasn't used to being challenged, but she didn't flinch. For the first time in his life, he realized silence could be respect, not defiance. He nodded once. Fine, stay behind me. No matter what happens, you follow my lead. They moved through the shadows, their footsteps muffled by the wet gravel. The old rail yard stretched before them like a graveyard of steel. Rusted carriages, flickering lamps, and the soft hum of distant trains echoing against the concrete walls. A single light glowed from one of the storage sheds near the far end of the yard. Vittorio recognized the signal, a prearranged code his men used when the meeting place was secure. Only Marco would know it. Something's off, Elena murmured. Too visible. I know, Vittorio said, gun steady in his hand. He's telling me it's a trap without saying it. They reached the edge of the shed, Vittorio flattening himself against the metal wall, listening. Voices inside, 2 men. One in pain, Marco. The other smooth, confident. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who thought they were in control. Where is it? The second man demanded in Italian. The drive, Marco. You know the boss doesn't like delays. Vittorio's pulse tightened. That voice, he knew it. He motioned for Elena to stay back, then kicked the door open with one clean strike. The room exploded into chaos. 2 armed men turned in surprise. Vittorio fired twice. Both dropped instantly. Marco lay bound to a chair, blood running down his temple. And standing behind him, calm and smirking, was Antonio Moretti, Vittorio's cousin. Cugino, Antonio drawled, his tone thick with false affection. Always dramatic. Vittorio's gun remained trained on him. You set me up, Antonio shrugged. You left me no choice. The family needs to evolve. These government contracts you refused, they were worth billions. You made enemies when you said no. I simply ensured I'd be on the winning side. Elena stepped into view, her pistol raised. Antonio's smirk faltered for a second when he saw her. Ah, the waitress. I should have known. You're the one who's been feeding him scraps of intelligence, yes? You're good. I'll give you that. Elena's eyes were ice. You're working with DeLuca. Antonio laughed softly. Working with? No, Kara. I am DeLuca's insurance policy. You think a police commissioner can run an international network without a partner on the inside? Someone with access to trade routes, ports, bribes? Vittorio built the empire, I perfected it. Vittorio's jaw clenched. You sold me out to the same people who killed our father's men. Antonio shrugged again. They killed yours, not mine. And don't pretend you didn't see this coming. You taught me everything, cousin. Loyalty, deception, profit. I just learned better than you. Before Vittorio could fire, Antonio pressed a button on his watch. The sound of boots echoed from outside. 5, maybe 6 men closing in fast. Kill them, Antonio said calmly, backing toward the rear exit. But keep her alive. DeLuca wants her brought in. Gunfire erupted. Vittorio grabbed Elena, shoving her behind a crate. The shed exploded in flashes of light and sound. Bullets tore through wooden beams. Vittorio returned fire, precise and deadly. Elena crouched beside him, reloading. We're pinned! He didn't answer, just fired 3 shots, dropping 2 men near the door. Marco groaned from the chair. Boss, go! They'll surround you. Vittorio cut his restraints with a knife and pulled him to cover. Not leaving you. The last attacker fell with a clean shot from Elena. Smoke and silence filled the shed. When Vittorio turned to the back, Antonio was gone. Only tire tracks remained in the mud outside. Elena holstered her gun, breathing hard. He's not coming back alone next time. Vittorio's voice was steel. No, he's going to Rome, to DeLuca, and we're following. Marco coughed, wiping blood from his lip. Boss, listen. There's something else. Antonio's been moving shipments labeled as humanitarian aid, crates full of weapons. They're using your network to arm mercenaries across Eastern Europe. That's why DeLuca needs you out of the way. Vittorio's stomach turned cold. My empire funds his wars. Elena glanced at him. Then we expose it. Use the network against them. Vittorio shook his head. Exposure means nothing. DeLuca owns the law. The moment we go public, we vanish. Then we hit him where it hurts, she said, voice fierce. Not with proof, with power. He looked at her, truly looked. Her face streaked with dirt, her hands trembling from adrenaline, but her eyes blazing with purpose. She wasn't afraid anymore. You're proposing war, he said. I'm proposing justice, she corrected. You can keep your empire. I just want my life back. For a long moment, the only sound was the dripping rain outside and Marco's ragged breathing. Then Vittorio nodded. War it is. They left the yard before the sirens arrived, disappearing into the maze of narrow Milan streets. By the time dawn bled over the horizon, they were already miles away, speeding down the A1 toward Rome. Elena sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through the recovered flash drive on her tablet. Antonio's been using diplomatic couriers. That's why customs never caught anything. He's tied to half the government. Vittorio's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. And the other half will take his side when DeLuca falls. Then we'll make them choose carefully. He looked at her, admiration creeping past the fury. You talk like a general. I was trained to fight wars no one sees, she said quietly. Now I'm fighting one that matters. For a moment, their eyes met. 2 soldiers of different worlds, drawn together by betrayal and survival. Then the tablet beeped, flashing a new message across the encrypted feed. From unknown source. Subject: Rome isn't safe. They're expecting you both. Elena's eyes widened. They know we're coming. Vittorio's lips curled into a dangerous smile. Good. He shifted gears, the engine roaring like a promise. Let them prepare. The safe house lay hidden in the hills outside Lake Como, an old stone villa tucked behind cypress trees and centuries of silence. Vittorio had bought it years ago under a fake name, a relic from a time when he still believed escape was possible. Tonight, it became their only refuge. He parked the van beneath the covered portico, the engine clicking softly as it cooled. Rain whispered against the tiled roof. The night air smelled of wet earth and pine. Inside, the villa was dark, the only light coming from the fireplace Elena lit with trembling hands. You've done this before, Vittorio observed, watching her coax the flames to life. She shrugged. Hiding? Yes. Lighting fires in mansions that don't belong to me? Not so much. He almost smiled, but the weight of what had happened crushed any trace of humor. Marco didn't respond, he said quietly, checking his encrypted phone for the 100th time. Either captured or worse. Elena looked up from the fire, her face bathed in flickering amber. He knew what he signed up for. So did I, Vittorio said, sinking into the leather armchair by the hearth. But that doesn't make the betrayal any easier. She tilted her head. You think it was one of your men? It had to be. No one else knew about Warehouse 17. That breach was internal. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching firelight. When power grows too big, loyalty shrinks. Elena took the opposite seat. Then we find the leak. He raised a brow. We? You saved me from a cell tonight. I'm returning the favor. Besides, the black cell isn't just coming for you, they're cleaning house. Every name on that drive will vanish unless we move first. Vittorio studied her. She spoke like someone used to giving orders, not taking them. What exactly were you in your old life, Elena? An analyst doesn't shoot like that. Her silence said enough. He leaned forward, voice low. Tell me the truth. If we're going to war together, I need to know who's beside me. The fire cracked sharply before she answered. Counterintelligence, she said finally. Department V Zurich. We handled infiltration, tracking, psychological extraction. I trained operatives to disappear until they used my methods against me. Vittorio let out a low whistle. So you were the hunter before you became prey. Her lips curved bitterly. Poetic, isn't it? He refilled her glass without asking. Why stay in Italy then? You could have vanished anywhere. Because running doesn't fix what's broken. She took a sip, eyes glinting in the firelight. And because I have unfinished business. Vittorio met her gaze, intrigued. Who? She hesitated, then said the name like it hurt to speak it. Lorenzo De Luca. The name hit him like a slap. The commissioner? Vittorio's tone turned cold. He's the one behind the black cell? Elena nodded. He built it. Used law enforcement resources to create a private network. One that eliminates political obstacles and launders evidence for anyone who pays. I found proof, and he framed me for espionage before I could go public. Vittorio exhaled slowly, the pieces beginning to fit. He's been sniffing around my roots for months, always sending auditors, always pretending it's about customs clearance. Now I know why. He rose, pacing toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving a ghostly fog rolling across the hills. You've given me the enemy's name, he said. Now we make him bleed. Elena shook her head. You can't just shoot him. Men like De Luca are made of politics, not flesh. You can't threaten what's already corrupted. Then we expose him. She blinked. Expose him? You mean? Vittorio turned back, eyes burning. You said he framed you. Then we find the original evidence. Force him into the light. I have contacts in Rome, journalists who still owe me favors. That's dangerous, she said softly. He smirked. So is dinner with me. The corner of her mouth twitched. I'm starting to notice. For the first time since the gunfire, they shared something that felt almost like laughter. Brittle, fleeting, but real. Then Vittorio's phone buzzed. A secure message from an untraceable source. He opened it and his expression froze. Your man Marco is alive, but not for long. Come alone to Porta Garibaldi train yard. 2 a.m. Bring the flash drive. The words burned. It's a trap, Elena said instantly. I know, but you'll go anyway, she added quietly. Vittorio pocketed the phone. He's family. You can't save him by walking into a firing squad. I've faced worse. She stood, blocking his path. Then at least let me come. No, yes, she said firmly. You need someone who knows their tactics. They'll jam your comms, isolate you, create false visuals. I can see it before it happens. Vittorio's eyes flicked to hers. Challenge meeting fire. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most foolish. Probably both. He sighed, a rare crack in his iron composure. Fine, but if anything happens, you run. Deal. He moved toward the hallway, grabbing his coat and holster. She followed, pulling her hair into a tight braid, her movements automatic, practiced. For a fleeting second, Vittorio wondered what she might have been before all this, before betrayal and exile turned her into a ghost. They stepped out into the misty night. The air smelled of wet cypress and diesel from the van. Vittorio slid behind the wheel, Elena beside him. 2 hours until the meet, he said. We'll take the northern route. No GPS, she nodded. I'll prep counter-surveillance. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but heavy with everything unspoken. Finally, she said, You know this could be your last night alive. He smirked faintly. Then I'll make it count. Elena turned to the window, her reflection pale against the dark. You really don't fear death, do you? He looked at her for a long moment. No, but I fear dying without knowing who to trust. She met his gaze. Then trust me, at least until sunrise. Vittorio didn't answer, but something in his chest shifted. Not quite belief, but close enough to be dangerous. As they drove toward Milan's sleeping skyline, the villa behind them sank back into silence, two fugitives bound not by fate, but by shared enemies, and the quiet understanding that sometimes survival begins where trust ends. Vittorio had always believed fear was a weapon, something you inflicted, not something you felt. But as the Maserati sliced through the dark streets of Milan toward the industrial district, fear was all he could taste. Not for himself. For control. For the first time in years, someone else had pulled the strings, and he was reacting, not commanding. Elena sat beside him, silent, watching the rain streak down the tinted glass. She had insisted on coming. If it's a setup, she had said quietly, you'll need someone who knows their playbook. Vittorio hadn't argued, not because he trusted her, but because he didn't trust anyone else. Warehouse 17 loomed ahead, an abandoned steel structure on the edge of the Navigli Canal. The headlights swept across the loading bay, revealing Marco crouched behind a pillar, gun drawn. His jacket was torn, blood at the corner of his mouth. Boss, he hissed as Vittorio stepped out. They hit us hard. 2 of ours dead, 1 missing. No sign of who. They were military precise. In and out in 3 minutes. Vittorio's eyes scanned the scene. Empty crates, bullet holes in concrete, the faint smell of cordite. He felt the cold rage rise, the kind that made men fear him. Security footage? He demanded. Gone. System wiped clean. Elena moved closer, her eyes darting across the shadows. They didn't come for money, she murmured. They came for information. Vittorio turned to her. What kind of information? She pointed to a broken server rack near the back wall. This place had your digital shipment logs, right? They weren't after drugs or cash. They wanted your roots. Access to your global supply chain, Marco frowned. That doesn't make sense. Why would cops care about... They're not cops, Elena cut in. They're the same people I told you about. The Black Cell. Vittorio's expression hardened. You'll explain everything. But not here. Before he could move, a sharp click echoed. The unmistakable sound of a rifle bolt sliding into place. Down, Elena shouted, grabbing Vittorio's arm and pulling him behind a concrete pillar, just as a burst of gunfire tore through the warehouse wall. Sparks exploded from metal beams. Marco returned fire, shouting orders into his earpiece. They're on the roof, he yelled. Vittorio drew his pistol, calm even under fire. He moved like a man born into violence. Precise, ruthless. He caught a glimpse of a black-clad figure darting between shadows above them. The muzzle flash brief but blinding. Cover the west exit, he barked. Elena reached for a fallen guard's weapon, checked the magazine like she'd done it 1,000 times, and took position beside him. The way she moved, efficient, fearless, told Vittorio she wasn't just a former analyst. She'd been in the field. You've done this before, he said, firing 2 quick shots into the rafters. Her response was a dry laugh, once or twice, usually on the other side. A grenade clattered across the concrete floor, rolling toward them. Smoke, Marco shouted, kicking it away, but the explosion filled the room with thick gray fog. Vision vanished. Coughing, Vittorio grabbed Elena's wrist. Stay with me. Wouldn't dream of leaving, she muttered, half choking on the smoke. They stumbled through the chaos toward a side corridor, gunfire fading behind them. Marco's voice crackled in Vittorio's earpiece. Go, boss! I'll cover! Marco, I said go! Vittorio gritted his teeth but obeyed. He He dragged Elena through a rusted door into the alleyway behind the warehouse. Rain poured down, cold and merciless. A black van screeched to a halt at the corner, doors sliding open. 2 masked men jumped out, weapons raised. Vittorio shoved Elena behind him, his gun steady. He fired twice, both shots hitting center mass. 1 man fell instantly. The other staggered back before collapsing. Elena stared, wide-eyed. "You kill like you breathe." He didn't look at her. "And you warn like you've been hunted." They climbed into the van, Vittorio taking the driver's seat. "Hold on." The tires screeched as he slammed the accelerator, tearing down the canal road. For several minutes, neither spoke. The city lights blurred past, reflections of gold and red in the wet streets. Vittorio's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Elena finally broke the silence. "You can't go back to your penthouse. They'll be waiting." "I have safe houses," he said flatly. "They'll know those too," she replied. "These people don't miss. They'll trace your patterns, your transactions, your security frequencies. If you want to survive, you need to disappear." Vittorio glanced at her, incredulous. "Disappear? I am the Moretti name. I don't disappear." "Then you die," she said simply. The bluntness hit harder than a bullet. She reached into her jacket, pulling out a small flash drive. "This is what they're after. I took it from the blue tie's phone before your men grabbed him." Vittorio slowed the car. "You had this the whole time?" "Yes, it contains surveillance directives, names, locations, contracts. You're on the top of their list." She looked at him seriously. "But you're not the only one." He parked under an old bridge, engine idling, rain hammering against the windshield. "Who else?" Elena hesitated, then whispered, "Me." Vittorio turned sharply. "They put me on the list after I refused to fake data for a political assassination. My superior was murdered 3 days later. I've been running ever since." The confession hung heavy in the air. He studied her face, the exhaustion, the quiet strength beneath it. "So you saved me last night because we share an enemy?" Her lips curved faintly. "Something like that." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, softly, "You realize what happens next, don't you?" She met his gaze. "We stop running." Vittorio's eyes darkened, not with anger, but something deeper. Determination. "Then we make them regret ever touching what's mine." Elena's pulse quickened. "You mean your empire?" "No," he said quietly, his gaze locking on hers. "You." For the first time, she couldn't look away. Rain drummed harder on the glass, muffling the city beyond. In that small space between life and war, 2 people who had no reason to trust each other found something that felt dangerously close to faith. The next morning, the sun had barely risen over Milan when Vittorio Moretti sat in his glass-walled office atop the Moretti Group headquarters. The skyline reflected against the tinted windows, silver and gold, beautiful and cold. His empire glittered beneath him, but for the first time, the view failed to impress. Marco entered quietly, placing a thin file on the mahogany desk. "Her name is Elena Rossi, 26, born in Florence. Moved to Milan 2 years ago. No criminal record, no social media, no family connections. Works part-time at La Fenice for 6 months. Before that," he hesitated. "Before that what?" Vittorio asked without looking up. "She taught languages at a private academy in Zurich. Fluent in Italian, English, German, and Russian." That made Vittorio's head lift. "A waitress with 4 languages? And no traceable past? Doesn't sound accidental." Marco nodded grimly. "It gets stranger. Her references are from companies that no longer exist. One was shut down for tax evasion, another dissolved quietly. But no direct link to any rival family. She's clean. Too clean." Vittorio leaned back, his gaze distant. "You think she's undercover?" "Could be a freelancer, or someone hiding from something." He drummed his fingers lightly against the polished desk. "Find out what she's hiding, but discreetly. If she's a civilian, I want no harm to come to her." Yet. Marco inclined his head and left, leaving Vittorio alone with the silence. He poured himself a shot of espresso from the silver machine by the window. His reflection in the glass looked like someone else. A man haunted by a pair of green eyes and a folded piece of paper. For years, Vittorio had believed control was safety. Power was protection. You built walls high enough and the world couldn't touch you. But last night, a single waitress had slipped a note under his napkin and shattered the illusion. He wasn't safe, not even in his own kingdom. That evening, Vittorio didn't usually return to the same restaurant twice in 1 week. Routine was dangerous. But something about Elena's calm defiance gnawed at him. He wanted answers. When he entered La Fenice, the maitre d' nearly tripped over himself offering a seat. Vittorio waved him off and chose the same table. The staff whispered in hushed tones. The Mafia Boss was back. Elena appeared 10 minutes later, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. "Buonasera, signore Moretti." Her voice was soft but steady. "Your usual?" He smiled faintly. "You remember my order." "I remember everything that doesn't make sense," she replied, scribbling on her pad. "Then perhaps you remember why you slipped me that note last night." Her pen stopped. She glanced up, meeting his gaze head-on. "Because if I hadn't, you'd be in jail right now. Or worse." Vittorio's smile vanished. "Explain." She looked around carefully before leaning closer, her tone almost conspiratorial. The man with the blue tie wasn't a journalist. He was carabinieri, undercover. Someone tipped them that you'd be here discussing smuggling routes. They were setting you up, recording you live to issue a warrant by midnight. Vittorio stared at her, his pulse slowing dangerously. "And how would you know that?" Elena hesitated. "Then, because I used to work for them." The air between them changed. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Your police?" "Was," she corrected. "I left last year. I'm not proud of who I used to serve." "Why?" Her jaw tightened. "Because they stopped serving justice. They started serving whoever paid better." For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet hum of violins filled the distance between them. Vittorio studied her face. Flawless composure. But her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Grief, maybe. "You realize what you did last night?" He said finally. "You interfered with an active operation." "That's obstruction," she smirked faintly. "Wouldn't be my first crime." He almost laughed. "Almost. You're very bold for someone who could disappear without a trace." "I've already disappeared once," she said quietly. "It's not as hard the second time." There was something behind that, something dark and personal. Vittorio recognized it immediately, the sound of someone who'd lost everything. He lowered his voice. "Why warn me at all? If you used to work for them, you know who I am. You should have let them take me." Her answer was immediate. "Because the people after you aren't the police anymore. They're worse." That made him pause. "Worse?" Elena looked away, scanning the room as if expecting to be watched. "There's a unit, unofficial. Off the record. They handle sensitive eliminations, blackmail, assassinations, political cleanups. I was recruited for data analysis, but when I started asking questions, they burned my file and erased my identity. That's why I'm here, hiding in plain sight." Vittorio's silence stretched. The candlelight between them flickered, throwing her face into gold and shadow. He exhaled slowly. "You're telling me there's a rogue division inside law enforcement targeting people like me?" "Not just you," she said. "Anyone who knows too much or refuses to cooperate. You're next because you refused to sell them your shipping network." He blinked. "You know about that?" Her faint smile was answer enough. Before he could press further, his phone buzzed in his jacket. Marco. One look at the message and his blood went cold. Warehouse 17 breached. 3 men down. Files stolen. He stood abruptly, chair scraping back. Elena's eyes widened slightly. "Stay here," he said sharply. But she rose too, voice urgent. "Vittorio, don't go there. That's what they want. They're drawing you out." He turned to her, anger flashing. "You think you can command me, ragazza?" "No," she said softly. "But I can save you again. If you let me." Something in her tone stopped him. Not fear. Not desperation. Certainty. For a man who didn't trust anyone, Vittorio found himself doing something dangerous. He believed her. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Then tell me where to go." Elena met his eyes, and for a moment, the mask dropped. He saw something raw, courage mixed with regret. "If you want to live through tonight," she whispered, "you need to forget your rules, because the game you're playing just changed." The restaurant was one of those places where silence cost more than the food. Every sound was deliberate: the soft clink of crystal, the low hum of violins, the faint sizzle from the open kitchen where flames danced against the copper pans. La Fenice sat at the edge of Milan's old district, a temple of elegance reserved for men who ruled from shadows. At the center of the room, beneath a chandelier shaped like molten glass, Vittorio Moretti leaned back in his chair. To the world, he was the polished CEO of Moretti Exports, luxury wines, fine marble, high fashion. But to those who mattered, he was Il Leone, the lion who controlled half of northern Italy's black market, without ever getting his hands dirty. His tailored navy suit fit like armor, his presence commanding respect without a word. "Un filetto, medio al sangue," he said smoothly, ordering his steak in perfect Italian. His tone carried quiet authority, a man so used to being obeyed that politeness sounded like a favor. The waitress standing beside him barely looked 25. Her name tag read Elena, but her posture wasn't that of an ordinary server. Straight spine, calm hands, eyes that watched everything. She nodded, jotting something in her small leather notebook, before glancing up just long enough for him to notice the quick flicker in her gaze. Not fear exactly, but something close. Awareness. The two men seated with Vittorio were mid-level associates pretending to be old money investors. They spoke with carefully measured laughter, sipping their wine while trading coded phrases about shipments and arrivals. Vittorio played along, letting them talk, knowing full well that every deal in this city began with deception. He reached for his glass of Barolo, watching the candlelight play across the red surface. That was when Elena returned. Her movements were graceful, quiet, the kind that didn't demand attention but earned it anyway. She set down a glass of sparkling water beside his plate, and as if by accident, placed a folded piece of paper under the napkin. Vittorio's instincts sharpened instantly. No one ever dared slip him notes, not in public, not in a place crawling with his security. He didn't move, didn't blink, just continued listening to the fake investors ramble about shipping routes through Trieste. When she left, he reached casually for his napkin, unfolding it just enough to see the paper. The handwriting was small, neat, and distinctly feminine. "Someone's recording you. 2 tables to your left. Blue tie." For the first time that night, the unflappable Mafia Boss felt his pulse shift. He didn't turn his head. Instead, he raised his glass again, pretending to enjoy his wine, while his mind started processing. Blue tie, 2 tables left. That was near the bar. A man sitting alone, dark hair, pretending to scroll on his phone. The reflection in the glass confirmed it, the camera lens glinting faintly from inside the phone case. Vittorio's jaw tightened. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said softly, in Italian. "Enjoy the wine. I'll make a quick call." He stood slowly, every movement measured. The 2 men didn't dare question him. As he stepped away, his personal bodyguard, Marco, appeared as if summoned by thought. "Left table. Blue tie." "Phone," Vittorio murmured without breaking stride. Marco's nod was nearly invisible. Within seconds, he'd intercepted the man, confiscated the device under the guise of an accidental spill. Vittorio didn't look back. He walked toward the corridor leading to the private restrooms, his mind racing through possibilities. Was it a journalist, a rival family's informant, or someone from within his own circle? At the corner, near the service station, the waitress appeared again. Elena. She was writing something on her pad, pretending not to notice him. But Vittorio stopped beside her. "Signorina," he said quietly, his accent low and dangerous. "That note, where did you get the information?" She looked up, startled but not afraid. "You don't have time to ask questions," she whispered in English, her Italian accent faint but elegant. The man wasn't alone. There's another outside with a camera in the window reflection. Vittorio studied her face. Steady eyes, not trembling, no panic. This wasn't her first time seeing danger. "You should not be involved in this," he said, voice dropping even lower. Too late, she replied simply, glancing toward the dining hall. You're welcome. Before he could respond, she disappeared through the swinging doors into the kitchen, leaving him with more questions than answers. He slipped back into the dining room, the predator behind calm eyes. The man with the blue tie was gone, escorted quietly by Marco. Everything looked normal again. But nothing was normal. The rest of the meal passed in silence, his associates oblivious to the storm brewing beneath their host's calm demeanor. When dessert was offered, Vittorio declined. He signed the bill without looking, added a tip far too large for coincidence, and stepped out into the cool night air of Via della Spiga. Marco was waiting beside the black Maserati. The phone was transmitting live, he said quietly. Feed linked to a hidden channel. We shut it down, but whoever it was, they knew your schedule. Vittorio's jaw flexed. Internal leak? Possibly. He looked back at the restaurant windows, where faint golden light flickered like secrets behind glass. Inside, he saw Elena again, standing near the bar, talking to another server. Her movements were graceful but sharp, like someone pretending to belong in a world she was merely surviving. Find out who she is, Vittorio ordered. Marco hesitated. The waitress? The waitress who spotted something my men didn't. Vittorio's tone was ice. Yes, find her. When they drove away, he kept thinking about her, about that calm, deliberate handwriting, and the way she said too late. He'd spent his life surrounded by fear and obedience. But that woman hadn't looked at him like a criminal or a king. She'd looked at him like a man who didn't know he was being hunted, and that terrified him more than anything.